This is the last four stories of the Brothers Grimm that we will be reading. Um, we have read a few of these stories in some other collaboration books and fairy tales that have come up. So some of these might sound familiar and other ones might not. I'm not sure. This is Brothers Grimm fairy tale from 1899. That was, I'm not sure who translated it, but in the description you'll find the Library of Congress call numbers. All of this stuff is in public domain, so you are free to use it, read it, look it up, and enjoy it any way you would like. Also want to point out that it is all being read by an extraordinarily dyslexic woman. So if names, places, events sound like stuff you've never heard, it's because dyslexic and just making stuff up, right? All right, here we go. The Golden Key. One cold winter's day, when the snow was thick upon the ground, a poor little lad was sent into the forest to gather wood, which he was to stack upon a little sled and bring home for fuel. By the time he had collected enough, he was so cold that he thought he would make a fire and warm himself before he went home. So he scraped away the snow, and in doing so found a little golden key. Ah, he said to himself, where the key is, there's sure to be a lock, and went on scraping away the snow until he found an iron chest. Now, he said to himself, if only the key fits the lock, I shall no doubt find all sorts of precious things in the chest. He searched for a long time, and at the last he discovered a lock so small, however, that one could scarcely see it. He tried the key, and it fit exactly. He turned it slowly, and if only we wait patiently until he has turned it right around and opened the lid, why, then we shall know what's inside the chest. That was that story. The next story is called Brother and Sister. The little brother, hold on one second, guys. So thank you guys for coming in tonight. Be sure to give it a thumbs up, right? I'm trying to get everything all set. Okay, brother and sister. The little brother took his sister by the hand and said, we have never had a happy moment since our dear mother passed away. Our stepmother beats us if we venture near her. Come, sister, let's go away into the wide world. So they set out and wandered the whole day long until they came to a great wood. And they were so weary with grief and hunger and the long way that they curled themselves up in a hollowed tree and slept. The next morning when they awoke, the sun was high in the heavens and shone warmly down upon the hollow tree. Then said the little brother, sister dear, I am so thirsty. If only I knew of a little brook where I could quench my thirst. Listen, I think I hear one gushing. The The little brother stood up and took his sister's hand, and they went together in search for the brook. Now, the wicked stepmother was a witch. She had seen the children go away, and creeping silently after them, as witches creep, she had bewitched every stream in the wood. When the children found a little brook that ran dashing over the stones, the brother stooped to drink, but the sister heard the words it murmured as it ran. Whoever drinks of me will become a tiger. Whoever drinks of me will become a tiger. Mm. And so the little sister cried, I pray you, do not drink, or you will become a tiger and tear me to pieces. And in spite of his great thirst, the brother did not drink, but said, I will wait until we come to the next stream. But when they came to the second brook, the sister heard it whisper, Whoever drinks of me will become a wolf. Whoever drinks of me will become a wolf. The little sister cried, Dear brother, I pray you do not drink, or you will become a wolf and eat me. The little brother did not drink, but said, I will wait until the next stream, and then no matter what you say, I must drink, for my thirst is greater than I can bear. When they came to the third little brook, the little sister heard it say as it rippled along, Whoever drinks me will become a fawn. Whoever drinks me will become a fawn. So she said, Brother dear, I pray you do not drink, or you will become a fawn and run away from me. So she said, but the brother knelt down as soon as ever he reached the brook, and bending his head began to drink. And as the first drops crossed his lips, he was changed into a little fawn. The sister wept bitterly over her poor little enchanted brother. Never mind, dear little fawn, said the little girl, I will never forsake you. And she took her golden garter and fastened it around his neck, and then she gathered some rushes and plaited a soft cord, which she fastened to the garter, and so led the little animal along further and further into the woods. She then searched for leaves. When they had gone a very long way, they came to a little house. The sister peeped in, and seeing that it was empty, thought to herself, We may as well stay here. Then she searched for leaves and soft moss to make a comfortable bed for the fawn, and every morning she went out and gathered roots and berries and nuts for her own food, and for the fawn she brought tender grass, which he ate from her hand, and was happy and contented playing beside her. For a long time they lived quiet alone in the wilderness, but at length the king of the country ordered a great chase to be held in the wood, and then the sound of horns and barking of dogs and the merry voices of the huntsmen were heard through the trees, and the fawn longed to be in the midst of it all. Oh, sister dear, he cried, please let me go to the chase. I cannot bear to stay away any longer. And he begged her so eagerly that at last the sister consented. But, she said, be sure you come back to me in the evening. I shall keep my door fast closed against the wild huntsmen. So you must knock and say, Let me in, little sister, and then I shall know that it is you. But unless you say this, I shall not open the door. So the fawn ran off into the wood, And the king and his huntsmen saw the beautiful creature and pursued him, but they could not catch him, and when at length they thought they were close upon him, he sprang behind some bushes and disappeared. When it grew dark, the fawn ran to the little house and knocked on the door and said, "Little sister, open the door and let me in." Then the door was opened and he entered. The next morning, when the fawn again heard the sound of the horn, he said, "Please, little sister, let me go." And the sister opened the door and let him out. When the king and his huntsmen saw the fawn, they set to work to try to catch him, but he was too nimble for them. However, towards the end of the day, they managed to surround him, and one of them wounded him in the foot so that he could not run as quickly as before, and one of the huntsmen was able to keep up with him. This man saw him go to the little house, knock on the door, and heard him say, "Little sister, let me in," and then saw that the little house door was open for him to enter and closed again immediately. He went straight away to the king and told him all that he had seen and heard. The little sister was so terribly frightened when she saw that her dear fawn was wounded, but the next morning the fawn was as well as ever again, for the wound had only been a slight one, and when he had heard the sound of the horn, nothing would satisfy him but that he must be off once more. So there was nothing left for the sister to do but to open the door and let him go. But it was with a heavy heart that she did so. When the king saw the fawn, he told his huntsmen to chase him the whole day long, but on no account to harm him. And as soon as the sun went down, the king went to the little house in the wood and knocked and said, "Little sister, let me in." The door opened and the king entered, and there stood the most beautiful maiden he had ever seen. She was very frightened when she saw a man wearing a golden crown instead of her fawn, but the king held out his hand and smiled. "Will you come to my castle," he said, "and be my dear wife?" The maiden consented to do so, but only on the condition that the fawn went too. So the king promised that he should go with them and that he should have everything his heart could desire his whole life long. At that moment the fawn came home, so the maiden fastened the cord of rushes to his collar and led him out of the house herself. The king lifted her upon his horse, and so they rode to his castle, where the wedding was celebrated with great splendor. So now the little sister was a great queen, and she and her husband lived happily together, whilst the fawn was tended with the greatest care and played about in the pleasant castle gardens. When the news of their good fortune reached the ears of the wicked stepmother, she was beside herself with hatred and envy, and could think of nothing but how she could work them some mischief. Her own daughter, who was ugly as night and had only one eye, reproached her, saying, "It should have been my luck to be queen." "Hush," said the old woman, "take comfort, for be sure that when the right time comes, I shall be ready." Time passed on, and the queen had a dear little son. Then one day, when the king was out hunting and the queen lay sick in bed, the wicked stepmother disguised herself as a servant and went to the queen and told her that she had prepared a healing bath which would make her well again. The ugly daughter was not far off, and she and her mother carried the queen into a room where there was no healing bath, but a great hot fire which soon unalived the poor invalid. When this was done, the old woman put a cap upon her daughter's head and make her take the form of the queen and get in bed. But as she could not give her an eye in place of the one which was missing, she told her to turn the blind side to the pillow so that the king might not notice it. When the king came home in the evening, he went to his wife's bedside, but the old woman called to him that on no account must he draw back the curtain, for the light would be too strong for the queen, and she must have rest. So he went away, little knowing that it was a false queen who lay in the bed. Midnight came, and everyone was fast asleep except the baby's nurse, who was watching beside his cradle. Suddenly, she saw the door open and the real queen enter. She bent over the cradle, took her baby in her arms, fondled it, and laid it cozily to rest again. She did not forget the fawn, but went to the corner where he lay and stroked his back. Then softly and silently she left the room. And in the morning, when the nurse asked the guard if they had seen anyone enter the castle during the night, they'd answered, "No, we've seen no one." In this manner, without ever speaking, she came for many nights. As though the nurse saw her each time, she was afraid to tell anyone. But after a time the queen did speak, and this was what she said. "How fares my baby? How fares my fawn? Twice more will I come, and then nevermore." The nurse answered never a word, but when the queen had vanished, she went to the king and told him all. "What can it mean?" he said. "Tomorrow night I shall watch beside the child myself." So in the evening he went to the nursery, and at midnight the queen appeared and said, "How fares my baby? How fares my fawn? Once more I come, then never more." She took the child in her arms, fondled it as usual, then disappeared. The king was afraid to speak to her, but the next night he watched again, and this time she said, "How fares my baby? How fares my fawn? I have come once more, but never again." The king could restrain himself no longer, but held out his arms towards her and said, "You must surely be my dear wife." And she answered, "Yes, I am indeed your own true wife." And in a moment her life came back, and her cheeks grew rosy red with health and strength and happiness. She told the king how wickedly the old witch and her daughter had behaved, and he ordered them both to be brought before the judge, who condemned the daughter to be sent out into the wood, whilst the old witch be turned to ashes. No sooner had this been done than the fawn received his human form again, and the brother and sister lived happily all the rest of their days. Thank you guys for being here with me tonight as we read the last part of the Brothers Grimm. I hope you're finding these bedtime stories soothing and relaxing. I'm trying to do it on my computer tonight, so a little darker picture, better for sleeping later, right? All right, guys. Our next story be afraid to hit like and subscribe. Turn the notification bells on so when we go live, you go live with us. And I am trying to reach 100,000 subs this year. So go on and hit that sub button for me. I'd appreciate it. All right. The next story is Snow White and Rose Red. All right. I don't know which direction is better. There was once a poor widow who lived in a lonely little cottage, in front of which was a garden. There were 2 rose trees bloomed, one of which bore white roses and the other red. Now the widow had 2 children who were like the rose trees. Excuse me. For one was called Snow White and the other Rose Red. The 2 little children loved each other so dearly that whenever they went out together, they walked hand in hand. Very often they went out into the wood to pick berries, but the wild beast would not harm them. Once, when they had spent the night in the wood and the sunrise awoke them, they saw a beautiful child in a shining white robe sitting beside their resting place. He rose and smiled, but said not a word, and went away into the wood. And when they looked around, they found they had been lying close to a precipice, over which they must have fallen in the darkness if they had taken another step. So their mother told them that the child they had seen must have been a sweet angel who watches over little children. The children lived a very happy life with their dear mother in her pretty home. In the evening, the mother would say, "Now, Snow White, bolt the door," and then the mother would read to them whilst the girls sat at their spinning wheels and listened. Beside them on the floor lay a little lamb, and on a perch behind them a white dove, with his head tucked snugly under his wing. One winter evening, as they all sat comfortably together, someone knocked at the door as though he wished to be let in. "Quickly, Rose Red," said the mother, "open the door. Very likely some poor wanderer has come to seek shelter." Rose Red ran and pushed back the bolt and opened the door, thinking to see a poor man, but instead a great black bear pushed his head in and looked at them. Rose Red screamed with fright. The little lamb began to bleat, and the dove shook its wings, and Snow White ran to hide herself behind her mother's bed. But the bear told them not to be afraid. "I am half frozen with cold," he said, "and only wish to warm myself a little." "Poor fellow," answered the mother, "lie down by the fire, but see that you do not burn your thick fur coat." Then she called the children and told them to have no fear, for the bear would not harm them, but was an honest, respectable fellow. So Snow White and Rose Red crept out from their hiding place and lay, and by the lamb and the dove came too, and were not the least bit afraid of the bear. Who asked the children to brush the snow from its fur for him? When the bedtime came, the mother told the bear that he might spend the night beside the hearth, and so be sheltered from the cold storm. As soon as the morning dawned, the two children opened the door, and he trotted away across the snow and was lost to sight in the woods. But from that day the bear came to them every night at the same time, laid himself down beside the hearth, let the children play pranks with him, and they soon grew so accustomed to him that they never bolted the door until their black friend had arrived. When spring came and the whole world was fresh and green, the bear told Snow White one morning that he would not be able to visit them again all through the summer months. "Where are you going, dear bear?" asked Snow White. "I must stay in the wood and guard my treasures from the wicked dwarfs. In the winter, when the ground is frozen hard, they cannot work their way through it, and are obliged to stay below in their caves. But now that the warm sun has thawed the earth, they will soon break through it and come out to steal what they can find, and that which once goes in their caves is seldom seen again." Snow White grieved sadly over the parting. As she unbolted the door, the bear hurried through and soon disappeared behind a tree. Some time afterwards, the mother sent the children into the wood to gather sticks. They came to a great tree which lay felled on the ground, and beside which something kept jumping up and down in the grass. At first they could not make out what it was, but as they came nearer they saw it was a dwarf with an old withered face and a snow-white beard and and ell long at last. The end of his beard had been fast caught in a splint in the tree, and the little creature, jumping about like a dog at the end of a string, and know not how to help himself. "What have you been doing, little man?" asked Rose Red. "You silly prying goose," answered the dwarf. "If you must know, I was splitting the tree to get some small piece of wood for the kitchen. I had just driven the wedge firmly in when it slipped on the smooth wood, popped out so that the tree closed up in a second, catching my beautiful white beard as it did so, and now I cannot get it out again. And you, foolish, milk-faced creature, stand and laugh at me? Oh, how horrid you are!" The children tried with all their might to help the old man, but they could not loosen his beard. And so Rose Red said she would run home and fetch someone to help them. "You stupid thing," snarled the dwarf. "Why go and fetch others when you are too many already? Can't you think of something better than that?" "Have patience," said Snow White. "I know what to do." And drawing her scissors from her pocket, she cut off the end of the old man's beard. As soon as the dwarf was free, he grabbed at a bag of gold which was hidden amongst the roots of the tree, threw it across his shoulders, and grumbled out, "What clumsy folk, to be sure, to cut off a piece of my beautiful beard! Bad luck to you!" And then, without so much as a word of thanks to the children, he went away. Now, sometimes afterward, Snow White and Rose Red went to catch a dish of fish, and as they neared the brook, they saw something that looked like a grasshopper hopping along towards the water. They ran towards it and soon recognized the dwarf. "What are you doing?" said Rose Red. "Surely you don't want to jump in the water." "Can't you see that horrid fish is pulling me in?" shrieked the dwarf. The little man had been sitting fishing when the wind entangled his beard with the fishing line. Just then a large fish took the bait, and the little weak creature was not strong enough to pull it out. "Oh dear. So the fish had the upper hand and was drawing the dwarf towards it. The children came just the right moment. They held the little man fast and tried to disentangle the line, but they could not do so. And at last there was nothing for but to bring out the scissors and snip a little piece of the beard. The dwarf was very angry when he saw what they had done. "Is it good manners," he yelled, "to spoil a person's face like that, you toads? Not content with having shortened my beard, you must now cut the best part of it. May you go barefoot all the days of your lives." He seized a bag of pearls, which had been lying in the reeds, and disappeared behind the stone. It happened that soon afterward the mother sent her 2 little girls into town to buy needles and thread, laces and ribbons, and on their way they led them across a piece of land where great rocks lay scattered about. There they saw a huge bird hovering in the air above them. Lower and lower it sank, until at last it settled upon a rock close by, and immediately they heard a piercing shriek. They hurried towards the sound and saw, to their horror, that the eagle had seized upon their old acquaintance the dwarf and was carrying him off. The kind-hearted children at once took hold of the little man and held him with the might and main, so that the eagle was obliged to give up its prey. As soon as the dwarf had recovered from his fright, he cried in his raspy voice, "Could you have been a little more careful? See, you've torn my delicate coat, so that it's all rags, stupid, clumsy creatures that you are." My goodness, not a very nice dwarf. Then he took a bag full of precious stones and slipped down into his den beneath the rock. The children were used to his ingratitude, so they just went on their way and did their marketing in town. On their way home again, they again met the dwarf. He had emptied his sack of precious stones upon a smooth place, little thinking to be surprised by anyone at such a late hour. The evening sun shone upon the glistening heaps of gems and made them sparkle and flash so prettily that the children stood and looked at them. "Why do you stand there gasping and gaping?" screamed the dwarf. He would have continued to scold, but at that moment loud growls were heard, and the big black bear came scrambling out of the wood. In terror, the dwarf sprang towards his cave, but the bear was too near and he could not reach it. Then he cried to his despair, "Dear Mr. Bear, spare me, and I will give you all my treasures." The bear took no heed of his words, but gave the wicked little creature one stroke with his paw, and he never moved again. The 2 little girls had begun to run away, but the bear now called to them, "Snow White, Rose Red, do not be afraid. If you wait for me, I shall come with you." They recognized the voice and stood still, and as the bear came up to them, his fur coat had suddenly fallen off, and he stood there, a fine, handsome man dressed all in shining gold. "I am the king's son," he said, "and I was condemned by the wicked dwarf who had stolen all my treasures to become a bear and run wild in the woods until I should be released by his unaliving. He has now received his well-earned reward. Shortly after, the disenchanted prince married little Snow White, while Rose Red was betrothed to his brother, and they divided between them all the beautiful treasures which the dwarf had collected in his cave. Thank you guys for being here. I sure do appreciate it. I hope you're finding our evening reading relaxing. I hope you like the dimmer lights a little bit better. Just kind of snuggled up in a hazy bedtime mist. Our bedtime mist. There we go. All right, this story we read from a different collection, but this is probably a little bit different version, okay? All right, here we go. Once again, we are reading the Brothers Grimm. So this is their book, and this is their writing of King Trush-Beard. Once upon a time, there was a king who had a daughter beautiful beyond words, but so proud and haughty that she thought no lover who came to woo her good enough. Not only did she send them all away, but she made fun of them. The king gave a great feast and invited all the bachelors, far and near. They were all made to stand in a row according to rank. First came the kings, next came the princess, then the dukes, the earls, the lords, and the gentry. And the king's daughter passed down between the rows to choose, but she had some fault to find with each one of them. One, she said, was too fat as a wine cask, the other too tall and lean, long and thin, has little in, she laughed mockingly. The next was too short, short and thick is never quick, she quoted. Another was too pale, another too red, another not straight enough. So she went on making fun of all, but in particular of a good king who stood right at the top of the row. He wore a short beard upon his chin, and the princess pointed her finger at it and cried, "He has a chin like the beak of a thrush." And from that time on, he was known by the name King Trush-Beard. But the king was so angry that he declared she should marry the first beggar man who came to his door. I remember this story from my childhood. 2 days later, a fiddler came. Singing beneath the castle windows, hoping to earn a few pence. When the king heard him, he ordered his servants to bring him in. So the beggar man came into the king's hall, clad in his dirty, ragged clothes, and sang to the king and his daughter. And when the song was ended, he begged for charity, and the king said, "Your song has pleased me so well that I will give you my daughter as a wife." The princess cried out in horror, but the king said, "I took an oath that I would give you to the first beggar man who came by, and I will keep my word." The princess pleaded, all in vain. A priest was sent for, and she and the beggar man were married there and then. Afterward, the king said, "It is not fitting that a beggar woman should remain in my castle any longer, so you may just go away with your husband at once." So the beggar man took her hand and led her away. She was obliged to draw it on foot. Presently they came to a wood, and she asked, "To whom does this beautiful wood belong?" "To King Trush-Beard," he answered. If you had taken him, it would have been yours. Ah, sighed the princess, if I had only had unhappy maiden that I am now. Soon afterward they came to a meadow, and the princess asked, to whom does this lovely green meadow belong? And the beggar man answered, to King Thrush-Beard. If you had taken him, it would have been yours. Ah, sighed the princess, if only I had, unhappy maiden that I am. Next they came to a great town, and again she asked, to whom does this great town belong? To King Thrush-Beard, answered the beggar. If you had taken him, it would have been yours. Ah, sighed the princess, if only I had, unhappy maiden that I am. Then the beggar man said, it is not very pleasant to hear you wishing for another husband. Am I not good enough for you? At length they came to a tiny house, and the princess said, to whom does this tiny house belong? What a wretched little place it is. The beggar man answered, that is mine and thine, the little house where we shall live together. The doorway was so low that the princess had to bend her haughty head to enter. Where are my servants? She asked. You will have no servants but yourself, answered her husband. Come now, be quick and light a fire. Put the kettle on to boil. I want my supper, for I am very tired. But the princess knew nothing about lighting fires or cooking food. Oh dear. And the beggar man had to lend a hand himself, or he would have had nothing to eat. The next morning he made her get up very early and do the work of the house. And so things went on for a day or two. And then when all the food had been eaten, he said, Wife, we cannot go on like this, eating and drinking and earning nothing. You must learn to plait baskets. So he brought some willows to her, and she tried to weave them. Hold on one second. She tried to weave them into a basket, but the tough willows hurt her delicate fingers. And then she had to say, then the beggar man said, this will never do. You had better try spinning. Perhaps that will be easier for you. So she sat down to spin, but the thread cut into her fingers so that the blood trickled down. You are fit for no sort of work at all, said the man. I have indeed made a bad bargain, but I will give you another chance. You shall take some pots to the market and see if you can sell them. Alas, she said, if my father's subjects should pass by and see me selling pots and pans on the street corner, they will mock me. But all the same, she was obliged or die of hunger. The first time, everything went well. The people bought the pots and pans just because the seller was so beautiful. Many of them even paid the price she asked, in giving her back her wares. She and her husband lived for some time on the money she had earned, and then the husband bought a new lot of crockery, and she went to the corner of the market and set out her wares and waited for folks to come and buy. But suddenly a tipsy houser came dashing down the marketplace right into the midst of her pots and pans and broke them into 1,000 pieces. Then she began to cry, oh dear, what shall I do? What will my husband say? She ran home and told him of the misfortune. Whoever heard of a person sitting at a corner of a marketplace when they had breakable goods? He said, well, it is quite plain that you are good for no ordinary kind of work. So I have been to the king's castle and have begged him to find you a place as a kitchen maid. They've promised to do, and you have your food instead of wages. So the king's daughter was now compelled to go and serve as a kitchen maid, be at the cook's beck and call, and do the hardest, dirtiest work. In each of her pockets she carried a little pot, and in these pots she put scraps that were given to her and carried them home, and upon this food she and her husband lived. It happened that the king's eldest son was to be married. The poor princess crept to the door of the great hall, and she might see some of the splendor of the wedding feast. Then, as she saw the lights flashing, the noble people passing to and fro in their gorgeous clothes, she grieved from her heart that her pride and vanity had brought her to her present lowly lot. The servants carried the costly food and drink now, and again threw her morsels and scraps, and these she put into her 2 pots, ready to carry home. All at once the king's son entered, dressed in velvet, silk, and golden chain about his neck. When he saw the beautiful woman standing in the doorway, he seized her hand and would have had her dance with him, but she drew back with fear, for she saw now that it was King Trush-Beard, the suitor whom she had refused and scorned. But her struggles were of no avail. He drew her into the great hall, when at last the string which held her pocket snapped, and the pots and food fell into the ground, and the soup and scraps which they were filled went into every direction. Oh, how the people laughed and mocked at her. She could have sunk into the earth with shame. She sprang to the door and would have run away, but a man caught her and brought her back, and as soon as she looked up, she saw that it was King Trush-Beard. He spoke kindly to her, saying, "Do not be afraid of me. I am the beggar man with whom you have lived in the little house. For love of you, I disguised myself so. I too was the houser who broke your crockery, and all this was done that I might humble your proud spirit and make you love me." The princess wept bitterly. "I am not worthy to be your wife," she cried. But King Trush-Beard kissed her and said, "Take comfort, dear wife. The evil days are past, and now we will keep our wedding feast." The maids in waiting came and dressed her in beautiful garments of gold and silver, and her father and his court all came and wished her good luck and happiness in her marriage with King Trush-Beard. And then the festivities began, right good and earnest. All I can say is that I wish you all had been there to see them. And that, my dear friends, is the end of our book, The Brothers Grimm, all the stories we've read. Pick another fairy tale to be read on Monday. We're going to take a break on Sunday. No, actually, yeah. Turn your notifications on. I might do a video upload of the reading because I'm going to be out of town on Sunday. Thanks again for spending your evening with me. I hope it was able to relax you. Have a good night.